Mark's heart pounded as he stood on his own doorstep, staring at the lock that no longer recognized him. His breath came slow, controlled, but his hands clenched into fists around the useless keys. The message from Emma still burned on his phone screen. "I found someone better. Don't bother trying to come in. I've moved on." Through the security camera above, he knew she was watching him, waiting for a reaction. Inside, through the dim glow of the living room, he saw her. Emma, curled up on the couch, a glass of red wine in her hand, completely at ease. And then a shadow moved behind her. A man, tall, comfortable, walking through Mark's home like he belonged there. Mark didn't blink, didn't breathe. His entire world had just imploded, and yet he exhaled slowly, steadily. He typed out a single reply. "Are you sure about that?" Then, without hesitation, he turned on his heel and walked away. But before we dive deeper into this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. And if you're enjoying this, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss a story like this one. Mark stepped out of the taxi, rolling his stiff shoulders after the long flight from London. The city lights of Austin shimmered in the distance, but he barely noticed. He was exhausted, drained from back-to-back meetings and sleepless nights in sterile hotel rooms. All he wanted was a hot shower, his own bed, and maybe, just maybe, the warmth of his wife curled up beside him. As he reached for his suitcase and started up the familiar stone pathway to his front door, a small frown crept onto his face. The porch light was off. Strange. Emma always left it on for him, especially when he traveled. He glanced around, noting that the house looked different. Off. The air carried an eerie stillness, the kind that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. Pushing the thought aside, he reached into his pocket, pulled out his keys, and slid one into the lock. It didn't turn. Confused, he jiggled it slightly, thinking maybe the humidity had swollen the doorframe again. Nothing. He tried another key. Still nothing. A cold weight settled in his stomach. This was his house, his door, his key, his wife. But the lock, his lock, had been changed. The realization hit like a slow-moving wrecking ball, creeping up his spine before slamming into his fingers tightened around the keys as his breath came slower, heavier. Then his phone vibrated in his pocket. Mechanically, he pulled it out, his eyes scanning the screen. A single message from Emma. "I found someone better. Don't bother trying to come in. I've moved on." For a moment, Mark didn't move, didn't blink. The words stared back at him, burning into his mind like a brand searing flesh. He inhaled sharply, steadying himself, and lifted his gaze toward the security camera mounted above the door. And there she was, Emma, sitting on the couch inside, a glass of red wine in her hand, watching him, smiling, relaxed, like he was nothing more than a delivery man she had dismissed. Then, as if the gut punch wasn't hard enough, a shadow moved behind her, a man, tall, broad, walking casually through Mark's living room like he belonged there. Mark didn't breathe, didn't react. He simply exhaled slowly, letting the weight of it all settle over him, and then, with an icy calm he didn't know he possessed, he typed out a single reply. "Are you sure about that?" And with that, he turned on his heel and walked away. Mark kept walking, his footsteps steady as he made his way down the driveway, but his mind was anything but calm. His pulse throbbed in his ears, his jaw locked so tight it hurt, but he refused to let the anger consume him. Not yet. Not here. Instead, the pieces started falling into place, snapping together like a cruel puzzle he should have solved weeks ago. Emma had been different before he left. Subtle at first, but noticeable. The way she texted less. Her messages growing shorter, void of warmth. "Miss you" had turned into "hope your trip is going well," then eventually into nothing at all. The routine goodnight calls became rushed, like she was squeezing them in between something more important. And then there was the moment that should have set off every alarm in his head. 3 nights ago, during one of their video calls, she had been sitting right there, on that same couch in that same living room, her smile tight, eyes darting away from the screen. They had been making small talk when he heard it. A laugh, deep, male. It wasn't from the TV. Mark knew the acoustics of his own house, knew exactly how sound bounced off those walls. When he asked about it, she barely hesitated before brushing it off. "Just a podcast," she had said, her smile forced, the way people smiled when they were hiding something in plain sight. He had believed her. Or maybe, deep down, he had wanted to believe her. Because the alternative meant admitting that everything he thought he knew about his marriage was a lie. But now, standing outside of his own home, staring at the locked door, it all made sense. The distance, the subtle changes, the way she stopped asking about his day, stopped seeming excited when he shared good news. She hadn't just been pulling away, she had been preparing to cut him out completely. The betrayal burned deep, but he wouldn't give her the satisfaction of seeing him break. Not tonight, not ever. He exhaled slowly, the ghost of a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Are you sure about that?" he muttered under his breath, turning away from the house, from the woman who once promised him forever. She thought she had won. She had no idea. Mark didn't go to a hotel. He didn't go to a bar to drink away the shock. He didn't even sit in his car and process what had just happened. Instead, he did what he had always done in high-stakes situations. He took action. As he walked toward the nearest intersection, he pulled out his phone and scrolled to a number he hadn't called in a while. Ryan picked up on the second ring. "Mark, thought you were in London." His voice was laced with confusion, but Mark didn't have time for small talk. "I just got home. Emma changed the locks." Silence. A heavy pause before Ryan exhaled sharply. "Shit." "Yeah," Mark said, his voice eerily calm. "And she sent me a text while watching from her security cameras. Told me she found someone better." Ryan's tone sharpened. "You want me to find out who?" "Already know. Saw him in the background. I need more than a name. I want everything. Who he is, where he came from, what he does, and most importantly, what the hell he wants from her." "Consider it done. Give me an hour." Mark ended the call and kept walking, feeling the adrenaline settle into something cold. By the time he reached a hotel lobby and checked in under a name he rarely used, his phone buzzed. Ryan had worked fast. Jason Carter, 36. Built his wealth in tech investments, got lucky a few years ago with a startup that sold big. He's been making the rounds in business circles, but get this, he's got a pattern. Mark sat down, gripping the phone tighter. What kind of pattern? He targets women, successful ones, married, high-powered, ambitious, gets close, earns their trust, then uses their connections to climb. Once he's gotten what he needs, he moves on, leaves them in ruins, financially, professionally, sometimes both. 3 cases in the last 5 years. None of them saw it coming. Mark clenched his jaw, staring out the hotel window. "So, Emma's just another name on his list?" "Looks like it," Ryan said. "But she doesn't know that yet." Mark sat in silence, absorbing the weight of it all. Emma had thrown away 8 years of marriage for a man who wasn't even staying for the long haul. She had handed her life over to a con artist in a designer suit, and the best part? She thought she was winning. That thought alone made Mark's next move even easier. He grabbed his laptop from his suitcase and logged into their shared cloud storage. Emma was careless with tech. She never changed the passwords Mark had set up years ago. The files loaded instantly, and what he found made his stomach twist. Photos. Dozens of them. Jason sitting in his chair, the one Mark had bought after landing his biggest deal. Jason wearing his robe, drinking from his whiskey glass. Jason in his bedroom, sprawled across the bed he and Emma had once shared, and then the one that made Mark's grip tighten on the laptop. Emma, in the mirror, taking a picture of the two of them in Mark's bathroom, his toothbrush still in the holder, his cologne still on the counter, his life hijacked. He closed the laptop and leaned back, inhaling deeply. Emma thought she had destroyed him. She thought she had won. She had no idea that she had just given him everything he needed to destroy her in return. Mark sat in the dimly lit hotel room, the glow of his laptop screen casting sharp shadows across his face. His fingers hovered over the trackpad, scrolling through picture after picture, each one more infuriating than the last. Jason wearing his robe. Jason drinking his whiskey. Jason in his bed. His entire life had been infiltrated while he was halfway across the world, trusting that the woman he married would be there waiting for him. And yet she had made herself comfortable with another man, right in the middle of the home he had built. A sharp vibration on the nightstand pulled him from his thoughts. His phone. Another text from Emma. He stared at it for a moment before finally unlocking the screen. "You're taking this well. I thought you'd put up a fight. Guess I really did find someone better." The arrogance of it, the smugness, the complete lack of remorse. Mark's grip on the phone tightened, but he didn't respond. Not yet. He could almost picture her, lounging on his couch, sipping his expensive wine, Jason's arm draped possessively over her shoulders as she sent that message, laughing at how easily she had discarded him. She expected anger. She expected him to lose control, to beg, to threaten, to show up at the door pounding his fists like some heartbroken fool. She wanted to see him broken. But all Mark did was smile. Because what Emma didn't realize was that her little power move had just given him all the ammunition he needed. She thought she was winning. She thought she had crushed him. She thought he had nothing left. She had no idea what was coming. Mark leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly as he closed his eyes for a brief moment. He could still hear Emma's voice in his head, dripping with condescension, that text practically sneering at him. "I thought you'd put up a fight." She had no idea that he wasn't the kind of man who fought with words or emotion. He fought with strategy. And she had just handed him a golden opportunity. Opening his laptop again, he navigated through his encrypted files, his fingers moving with a precision that came from years of experience in finance. Emma had always been ambitious, always dreamed of being financially independent. But what she had conveniently forgotten was how much of that independence had come from him. When they got married, she had aspirations, but no real assets. Mark had been the one to guide her, helping her build a solid investment portfolio, setting up accounts, securing deals that she never could have gotten on her own. But what she failed to remember, or maybe just never bothered to read in detail, was the contract she had signed when he structured those investments for her. It was all there in black and white. He was the primary investor. His money had been the foundation. And most importantly, there was a clause that stated in the event of a separation, all jointly managed assets under her name would be liquidated immediately. No negotiations, no delays. Every stock, every property investment, every account that she thought made her financially independent would turn to dust the moment he pulled the trigger. She had spent the last few months preparing to cut him out of her life. He had spent years preparing for the moment someone would try. Mark smirked as he took a screenshot of the document and attached it to an email. His lawyer, David, would know exactly what to do. He typed out a simple message: execute the clause, effective immediately. Then, just before hitting send, he added one last line: I want her to feel it before she even realizes what's happening. Emma had played him for a fool. Now it was time for her to learn what real consequences felt like. Mark was still awake when his phone rang. He didn't recognize the number at first, but something in his gut told him to answer. He swiped the screen and brought it to his ear. The sound of soft, uneven breathing filled the line before a voice broke through, shaky, almost hesitant. "Mark, it's Lauren, Emma's sister." Mark sat up a little straighter. "Lauren, why are you calling me?" A muffled sob came through the speaker, followed by a deep inhale like she was trying to steady herself. "I can't keep quiet anymore," she finally said, her voice thick with guilt. "Emma, she has no idea what she's gotten herself into." Mark's jaw tightened. He didn't respond, just let the silence press her to keep talking. "Jason," she whispered, "he's done this before, 3 times. Emma thinks she's special, that he loves her, but she's just another name on his list. He finds women like her, successful, married, powerful in their industries. He makes them feel wanted, makes them trust him, and then he uses them." Mark stayed quiet, absorbing every word. "He gets them to open doors for him," Lauren continued. "Introductions to their company executives, insider knowledge on business deals, financial access, anything that gives him leverage. And then, when he's gotten everything he can, he leaves. He disappears like he never existed. The last woman he did this to lost everything. Her career, her reputation, her marriage. I tried to warn Emma before it was too late, but she wouldn't listen." Mark clenched his fist. He wasn't surprised, but hearing it confirmed by someone else made the anger settle deeper, colder. Emma had thrown away 8 years of marriage for a man who wasn't even staying. She had handed her life over to a predator and thought she was in control. "There's something else," Lauren whispered. "I found something tonight." She hesitated, then continued. "Emma, she's been moving money, large amounts, and she's been hiding it." Mark's grip on the phone tightened. "How?" "Bank transactions," she admitted. "I saw the records. She's been funneling money into a private account, small enough transfers that they wouldn't raise red flags immediately, but over time, it's a lot. Mark's mind started piecing things together. That's not all, Lauren added. She's been using her corporate card for personal expenses. And I'm not talking about a dinner or a few shopping trips. We're talking high-end furniture, jewelry, flights, hotel suites. If this comes out, it won't just be her losing you, Mark. She'll lose her entire career. Mark exhaled slowly, his lips pressing into a thin, satisfied line. He had been planning to take everything from her, but she had already done half the work for him. Mark leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling of his hotel room with a quiet satisfaction. Emma thought she had won. She thought she had taken control, but in reality, she had built her own downfall, brick by brick, and all he had to do was give it a little push. He picked up his phone, his fingers moving across the screen with careful precision. Every word mattered. Every sentence was a carefully placed match near an open gasoline tank. He typed, then reread it once, just to make sure it was perfect. Had an interesting chat with the board about those expense reports. The couch looks great, by the way. Original receipts would be helpful. The moment he hit send, he set the phone down and waited. He knew exactly what this would do to her. The calmness of it. The implication hidden behind so few words. The absence of direct accusation, but the clear message that she had been caught. He didn't have to wait long. Less than a minute later, his phone buzzed. Then again. What are you talking about? But, Mark, we need to talk. Buzz. Please call me. He chuckled under his breath. There it was, the panic setting in. She wasn't laughing anymore. She wasn't smug. She wasn't sending arrogant texts about how she had found someone better. No, now she was grasping for control, trying to put out a fire she didn't even know the size of yet. But Mark wasn't interested in talking. Talking was for people who still had something to negotiate. He slid his phone into his pocket and picked up his briefcase. He had somewhere to be. By the time he arrived at the office of his lawyer, David, the pieces were already in motion. David had been briefed, had received the financial documents, the proof of her misused corporate funds, and the ironclad clauses in the investment portfolio contract. From there, Mark met with his accountant, ensuring every legal action was airtight, leaving no loophole for Emma to wiggle out of. Then, the final step. A quiet meeting with the board of Emma's company. He didn't need to expose everything yet. He didn't need them to take action immediately. He just needed to plant the seed. And once it started growing, Emma wouldn't be able to stop it. The boardroom was silent except for the faint hum of the overhead lights. Mark sat at the far end of the long, polished table, his fingers drumming lightly against the armrest of his chair. He had always found corporate meetings tedious, but this one was different. This wasn't just business, this was personal. Across from him, the company's senior executives shuffled uncomfortably in their seats, exchanging glances. They weren't sure why he had called this meeting, but they would soon find out. David, his lawyer, sat beside him, a thick folder of documents resting on the table in front of them. Mark let the silence stretch a little longer before he finally spoke. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice steady, controlled. "I called this meeting because I believe there are financial irregularities within this company that need immediate attention." Several board members stiffened at the words. The CFO cleared his throat. "Financial irregularities?" Mark didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into the folder, pulled out the first document, and slid it across the table. "These are unauthorized corporate expenses made by Emma Carter." The CEO's eyes narrowed as he picked up the papers. One by one, the others leaned in, scanning the transactions. Private jet charters, luxury hotel stays, high-end furniture purchases. The numbers were staggering. The CFO frowned. These were filed as business expenses? Disguised as them, Mark corrected, but they weren't for the company, they were for her personal life. He paused, then added with a sharp edge, "And Jason Carter." A ripple of murmurs swept through the room. Jason's name was well known, not just for his so-called success in tech, but for his reputation. Some of the executives had likely heard whispers about his history of using women for financial gain, but now there was evidence, and Emma was directly tied to him. The CEO's face hardened. "This is serious." Mark sat back, letting the weight of his words settle. "It is," he agreed. Then, with deliberate precision, he pulled out another document and placed it on the table. "And I'm not just here as an observer." He let the moment breathe before he delivered the blow. "I own 12% of this company." Silence. The CFO blinked. "What?" Mark leaned forward, clasping his hands together. 12%, he repeated. "I acquired shares under a holding company over the last 5 years. Your executive vice president," he nodded toward the CEO, "was aware of the transactions, though I doubt Emma ever realized it." He let that hang in the air before continuing. "And as a shareholder, I'm calling for an immediate audit of all executive spending, effective today." The reaction was immediate. Some of the board members straightened in their chairs while others exchanged looks of concern. The CEO exhaled slowly, nodding. "If these documents are accurate," he said carefully, "this is grounds for termination." Mark didn't need to say anything else. He had set the fire. Now he just had to watch it burn. It didn't take long. Word spread through the company within hours. Emma was pulled from a meeting, her face pale as she was escorted into the CEO's office. Jason, who had been parading around like a king, disappeared the moment the audit was announced. Emma tried to contact him. Mark knew this because Ryan had eyes everywhere, but Jason didn't answer. He didn't need the liability. He had already moved on. By the end of the day, Emma's career was over. Her stock options were frozen, her company accounts locked, and she was given a choice: resign quietly or face public termination. She chose to resign. She had no other option. Mark sat in his office, watching the city skyline as his phone buzzed once again. Another message from Emma. This one was different. "We need to talk. Please." He didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. Emma waited until after midnight. The house was dark, silent, exactly as she had hoped. She parked a block away and walked the rest of the distance, her heels clicking softly against the pavement before she slipped off her shoes and carried them the rest of the way. Her hands trembled as she pulled a spare key from her purse, one Mark didn't know she had, and fitted into the back door's lock. It turned smoothly, and within seconds she was inside. The familiar scent of the home she had once shared with him wrapped around her, but it didn't bring her comfort. It felt foreign now, like she was trespassing. Maybe she was. She moved quickly, making her way to his office. If there was one thing she had learned about Mark over the years, it was that he planned everything. He was meticulous, calculated, dangerous when pushed. She had underestimated just how much damage he could do until it was too late. Her job was gone, her accounts were frozen, Jason had ghosted her the second things started falling apart. And now, she was left scrambling for anything that might save her. She knew Mark kept important documents here, financial records, contracts, things she could use to figure out just how deep she was in this mess. Her fingers traced over the edges of his desk before she crouched down, running her hands along the bottom drawer. It was locked, but she didn't need what was inside. She needed what was behind it. The safe. She had seen him open it before. It was where he kept backups of every contract, every business deal, every investment. If there was anything she could use to salvage herself, it would be in there. She knelt in front of it, her pulse pounding in her ears. The keypad blinked, waiting. She swallowed hard and typed in the first code that came to mind. Their wedding anniversary. Incorrect. Her breath hitched. Her fingers hovered over the keypad before she typed in her birthday. Incorrect. She bit her lip, her hands trembling now. She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to think. Then it hit her. The day she got promoted. Mark had taken her out to celebrate. He had told her how proud he was. She entered the date. Incorrect. A cold, sinking feeling settled in her stomach. She stared at the blinking screen, realization creeping in like ice in her veins. Mark had changed the code. No, not just changed it. He had chosen something specific, something meant to remind her exactly why she was here. Her fingers hesitated before she typed in one last date, the date she had signed the contract, the one she had never read carefully enough, the one that had let Mark destroy her. The safe clicked open, but as she reached inside, her heart stopped. It was empty, except for a single envelope. She picked it up with shaking hands, unfolded the paper inside, and felt the world tilt beneath her feet. A single sentence, typed neatly in the center of the page. I told you to be sure. Mark stood in his new office, running his fingers along the smooth leather of the couch Emma had once been so proud of, the $95,000 statement piece she had bought to impress Jason, the one she had lounged on while texting Mark that she had found someone better. The same couch where Jason had likely whispered promises in her ear, feeding her delusions of a future that no longer existed. Now, it belonged to Mark. He had arranged for it to be delivered here, right in the center of his office where he could see it every day, a trophy of sorts, not just of Emma's betrayal, but of her downfall. A reminder of how easily everything she built had crumbled beneath her. He settled onto it, stretching his arms over the backrest, exhaling slowly. It was comfortable, expensive, but it had never been about comfort. It had been about status, about proving to herself and to Jason that she had reached a certain level of success, that she belonged in a world of wealth and power. And now, that world had spit her out. His phone buzzed on the desk. Another message from Emma. "Mark, please, just talk to me." He didn't reply. He didn't even feel anger anymore. She was nothing to him now. He had taken back everything: his house, his financial security, his reputation, but more importantly, he had left her with exactly what she deserved. Nothing. He leaned back, running a hand along the armrest of the couch, smirking to himself. Emma had chosen this. And Mark had just made sure she lived with it. Mark sat in his office, the city skyline stretching before him, the glow of downtown Austin casting long shadows across the room. The night was quiet, except for the faint hum of traffic below. His phone buzzed again, and he already knew who it was before he even glanced at the screen. Emma. He took his time picking it up, letting the anticipation settle before finally swiping to read the message. "You planned this all along, didn't you?" He stared at the words for a long moment, letting them sink in. She had finally figured it out. Not just that she had lost, but that she had never really stood a chance. She had thought she was playing a game, that she had been the one pulling the strings, but Mark had been ahead of her from the start. The moment she decided to betray him, she had unknowingly stepped onto a chessboard where he had already predicted every move, every contract, every financial loophole, every carefully placed domino leading to her downfall. He could almost picture her now, sitting alone, staring at her phone, waiting, hoping, desperate for some kind of response, some kind of control, but there was nothing left to control. Mark placed the phone face down on the desk. He didn't reply. Some questions don't deserve answers. Instead, he leaned back, reached for the glass of whiskey on the table and took a slow sip. The warmth burned down his throat, smooth, satisfying. He exhaled, staring out at the city, a smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. Emma had made her choice. And Mark had simply ensured that she would live with it. Mark took another slow sip of his whiskey, the ice clinking softly against the glass as he let the silence settle around him. The city outside was alive, cars moving, lights flickering, people going about their lives. Somewhere out there, Emma was watching her world crumble, piecing together the reality that she had never been in control. She had thought she was playing a game, thought she had outmaneuvered him, thought she had found someone better. But in the end, all she had found was the consequences of her own choices. What would you have done in Mark's position? Would you have walked away, cut your losses, and let karma do its work? Or would you have done exactly what he did? Waited, watched, and ensured that the person who betrayed you felt every ounce of the destruction they had tried to bring upon you? Some might say revenge isn't worth it, that moving on is the better choice, that no amount of payback can erase the pain of betrayal. But is that really true? Or is the real satisfaction knowing that you didn't have to destroy them yourself, they did it for you? Mark never had to shout, never had to beg, never had to make a scene. He simply let Emma walk the path she had chosen, let her dig her own grave, let her set fire to her own life while thinking she was building something better. That's the real lesson, isn't it? The best revenge isn't about anger or destruction. It's not about ruining someone out of spite. It's about calmly watching as they ruin themselves while believing they've won. Mark didn't need to respond to her last message. He didn't need to give her the closure she was looking for, because in the end, the silence was louder than any words he could have spoken. Mark swirled the amber liquid in his glass, watching the way the light caught its surface. There was no need for anger, no need for final words. Emma had already heard everything she needed to, not from his mouth, but from the weight of her own downfall. She had gambled everything, convinced she was walking away with the better hand, only to realize too late that she had been playing against someone who had already mastered the game. Some betrayals don't deserve forgiveness. Some wounds don't heal with time, but the greatest power lies in choosing how to respond. Mark hadn't begged. He hadn't chased. He had simply let the truth unfold piece by piece until there was nothing left for her to cling to. That's the difference between reacting and controlling the outcome. Betrayal hurts, but the real victory isn't about getting even. It's about knowing you never needed them to begin with. It's about taking back your life, your power, and your peace. Because at the end of the day, you don't destroy someone by fighting them. You destroy them by showing them they never had any power over you at all. If you've ever been in Mark's shoes, if you've ever been betrayed, used, or underestimated, know this. You don't have to seek revenge. Just step back, let them think they're winning, and when the moment comes, let them realize they've lost everything on their own. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories of strength, resilience, and redemption, because in the end, the best stories aren't just about revenge, they're about taking back control.